I thought I knew what betrayal felt like until my boyfriend told me I was contaminating our bedroom and made me sleep on the couch for a week every month. I've been with my boyfriend for 3 years now, and up until last month, I genuinely believed he was the one. We've been living together for about 8 months in this cute little apartment downtown, splitting everything 50-50, and I thought we had this amazing partnership going. He was sweet, attentive, and seemed to really care about me. Or at least that's what I convinced myself of. The whole nightmare started during what should have been a completely normal Tuesday morning. I woke up and realized my period had started overnight, which honestly wasn't a big deal since I'm pretty regular. I quickly changed the sheets while he was in the shower, threw them in the washing machine, and went about my morning routine. When he came out of the bathroom, he noticed me putting fresh sheets on the bed. He asked what happened, and I casually mentioned that my period started and I wanted to change the sheets just to be safe. The look that crossed his face was something I'd never seen before. It wasn't disgust exactly, but this weird combination of horror and anger that made my stomach drop. He started going on about how this was gross and unsanitary, and how he couldn't believe I would just sleep in the same bed after something like that happened. I tried to explain that periods are completely natural and that I had immediately cleaned everything up, but he wouldn't hear any of it. He said that from now on, whenever I was on my period, I needed to sleep somewhere else because he couldn't handle the thought of sharing a bed with me during that time. I was completely stunned. This was the same man who had been nothing but loving and supportive for 3 years, and suddenly he was acting like I was some kind of walking biohazard. At first, I thought he was having some kind of weird moment and would come to his senses. I mean, we're both adults in our mid-20s, and this seemed like something a teenager might say, not a grown man. But as the day went on, he remained completely serious about it. When bedtime came around, he actually pointed to the couch and told me that's where I'd be sleeping for the next few days. That first night on the couch was absolutely miserable. The couch isn't particularly comfortable for sleeping, and I was dealing with cramps and all the usual period stuff while trying to process what was happening in my relationship. I kept thinking he would realize how ridiculous he was being and invite me back to bed, but that never happened. Instead, he seemed perfectly content to have the entire bed to himself while I suffered on the couch. The next morning, I tried to have a rational conversation with him about it. I explained how hurtful his reaction was and how periods are just a fact of life for women. I told him that making me sleep on the couch made me feel like he saw me as dirty or shameful during a completely natural bodily function. But instead of listening or showing any empathy, he doubled down on his position. He said he understood that periods were natural, but that didn't mean he had to be comfortable with it, and that he had every right to not want to share a bed during that time. What made it even worse was how he tried to make it seem reasonable. He kept saying things like how he was just being honest about his boundaries and that I should respect his feelings about it. He even suggested that maybe I could use the guest bedroom at his parents' house when they were out of town, as if that was some kind of generous compromise. The whole thing felt surreal, like I was living in some alternate reality where basic human biology was treated like a contagious disease. Update 1. So it's been about 2 weeks since my original post, and things have gotten so much weirder and more complicated than I ever could have imagined. I thought the sleeping situation was bad, but that turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg. After that first week of sleeping on the couch, I decided I needed to do some investigating because his reaction seemed so extreme and out of character. I started paying closer attention to his behavior and noticed some things that I had apparently been blind to before. Like how he would always leave the room when tampon commercials came on TV, or how he had never once been to the store to buy me period products even though he'd buy me other personal care items without any issue. But the real eye-opener came when I was using his laptop to look something up for work since mine was charging in the bedroom. I wasn't snooping or anything, but when I opened a new browser tab, it auto-filled to this forum that I had never heard of. Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked on it. What I found there made my blood run cold. It was this community of men who have extremely negative views about women and their bodies, and the specific thread he had been reading was all about how periods make women unclean, and how men shouldn't have to deal with it. The posts were full of the most vile, misogynistic garbage I had ever read, with men talking about how they refuse to be intimate with their partners during that time of the month, how they make their girlfriends and wives sleep elsewhere, and how women should be grateful that men tolerate them at all during their cycles. Reading through his browsing history was like discovering that the person I loved had been living a double life. He had been active in these forums for months, posting about our relationship and asking for advice on how to handle his disgust with my period. He had even posted photos of our apartment, asking other men in the group whether he was being too lenient by letting me use the main bathroom during my period instead of making me use the guest bathroom. The worst part was reading a post he had made just a few days earlier where he talked about how proud he was that he had finally put his foot down and established boundaries. He described making me sleep on the couch like it was some kind of victory, and the other men in the forum were congratulating him and encouraging him to be even more strict about it. Some of them were suggesting he make me leave the apartment entirely during my period, or that he should charge me extra rent for the inconvenience of having to deal with a woman's natural bodily functions. I felt physically sick reading all of this. This wasn't just about him being squeamish or having some unusual hang-up. This was about him actively participating in a community that views women as inherently disgusting and inferior. All those loving things he had said to me over the years, all the times he had seemed supportive and caring, suddenly felt like lies. How could someone who claims to love me participate in discussions about how awful and gross women are? I didn't confront him immediately because I needed time to process what I had discovered. Instead, I started documenting everything. I took screenshots of his forum posts, his browsing history, and the conversations he had been having with these other men. I also started keeping a journal of his behavior toward me, noting all the little things that I had previously dismissed or explained away. That's when I realized that this had been going on for much longer than I thought. Looking back with this new perspective, I could see that his attitude toward me had been gradually changing over the past several months. He had become more critical of things about me that he used to find endearing. He had started making little comments about women in general that I had brushed off as just him being in a bad mood or having a rough day at work. The sleeping arrangement continued, and each night on that couch felt like torture. Not just physical torture from the uncomfortable sleeping situation, but emotional torture from knowing what he really thought about me and women in general. I would lie there listening to him sleep peacefully in our bed while I tried to figure out how I had ended up in this situation and what I was going to do about it. During this time, I also reached out to my sister, who lives across the country. I didn't tell her everything at first, just that I was having some relationship issues and needed someone to talk to. She immediately offered to let me come stay with her for a while if I needed space to figure things out. Having that option available gave me some comfort, even though I wasn't ready to take her up on it yet. I also started looking at our financial situation more carefully. Since we had been splitting everything 50-50, I realized that I could afford to live on my own if I needed to. It wouldn't be as comfortable as our current arrangement, but I wouldn't be trapped financially, which was a relief. I had always been pretty independent before we moved in together, and I started to remember what that felt like. The hardest part during this period was pretending that everything was normal when we were around other people. We had dinner with his parents, and I had to sit there and act like their son wasn't treating me like a pariah in my own home. We went to a friend's birthday party, and I watched him charm everyone with his usual personality while knowing what he was really like behind closed doors. It felt like I was living a double life myself, and the strain of keeping up the facade was exhausting. Update 2. It's been about a month since my last update, and honestly, I don't even know where to begin with everything that's happened. If I thought things couldn't get any more insane, I was completely wrong. So I had been sitting on all this information about his forum participation for about a week, trying to figure out how to handle it, when something happened that forced my hand. I came home from work early one day because I wasn't feeling well, and I found him in our living room with two other men I had never seen before. They were sitting around our coffee table with laptops open, and when I walked in, they all got this weird, guilty look on their faces. My boyfriend immediately jumped up and started making excuses about why I was home early and trying to rush me out of the room. But I had already seen enough to realize that these were probably men from his online forum, and they were having some kind of in-person meeting in our apartment. The thought of these strangers who had been reading about my personal life and discussing my body being in my own living space made me feel violated in a way I can't even describe. I went to the bedroom and closed the door, but I could hear them talking in low voices for about another hour before the other men left. When my boyfriend came to check on me, I asked him directly who those men were and what they were doing in our apartment. He tried to play it off like they were just friends from work, but I pressed him for details and his story didn't add up at all. That's when I decided I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I told him I knew about the forum and that I had read his posts about me. The look on his face was pure panic, like he had been caught doing something terrible, which honestly he had. But instead of apologizing or trying to explain, he immediately went on the defensive. He started yelling at me about invading his privacy and violating his trust by looking at his browsing history. He said I had no right to judge him for seeking support from other men who understood what he was going through. The way he said what he was going through, like my period was some kind of trauma that was happening to him instead of a natural bodily function that was happening to me, was just incredible. The argument escalated quickly, and he said some things that I don't think I can ever forgive or forget. He told me that he had been trying to be patient and understanding, but that living with a woman was harder than he had expected. He said that he loved me, but that he couldn't help being disgusted by certain aspects of female biology, and that I should be grateful he was willing to work through it instead of just breaking up with me. But here's where the story takes a turn that I absolutely did not see coming. In the middle of this argument, there was a knock at our door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and neither was he, so we both stopped yelling and looked at each other in confusion. He went to answer it, and I could hear a woman's voice in the hallway, but I couldn't make out what she was saying. A few minutes later, my boyfriend came back into the room looking like he had seen a ghost. Behind him was a woman who appeared to be in her 40s, well-dressed and carrying a professional-looking bag. She introduced herself as a private investigator and said she needed to speak with both of us about a legal matter. It turns out that one of the other women whose boyfriends were part of this online forum had hired this investigator to look into the group's activities. Apparently, some of the men had been sharing intimate photos and personal information about their partners without consent, and several of the women were considering legal action. The investigator had tracked down all the active members of the forum, and we were one of several couples she was visiting to inform about the potential legal implications. She showed us printouts of posts from the forum that included photos of our apartment, details about our personal lives, and even some pictures that my boyfriend had taken of me without my knowledge. Seeing my own image in these forum posts being discussed by strangers in the most degrading terms possible was absolutely devastating. I had never consented to any of this, and I had no idea that my privacy had been violated to this extent. The investigator explained that several of the women were planning to file lawsuits for invasion of privacy, harassment, and distribution of personal images without consent. She said that the forum itself was being investigated for potentially facilitating illegal activities, and that all of the active members could face legal consequences depending on what charges were filed. My boyfriend was completely freaking out at this point. He kept insisting that he had never shared any inappropriate photos and that he was just looking for support and advice from other men. But the investigator showed us evidence that he had in fact shared photos of me sleeping on the couch during my period, along with detailed descriptions of my personal hygiene habits and other intimate details about our relationship. After the investigator left, we had the biggest fight of our entire relationship. I was furious about the violation of my privacy and the fact that he had been sharing details about my body and personal life with strangers online. He was panicking about the potential legal consequences and begging me not to join the other women in filing charges against him. But the legal stuff wasn't even the worst part. What really broke my heart was realizing that the man I had loved and trusted for 3 years had never actually respected me as a person. Every intimate moment we had shared, every time I had been vulnerable with him, he had been viewing me through this lens of disgust and resentment. He had been performing the role of a loving boyfriend while secretly harboring these deeply misogynistic views about women. I called my sister that night and told her everything. She was absolutely horrified and immediately offered to pay for a plane ticket for me to come stay with her while I figured out my next steps. I was emotionally exhausted and couldn't think clearly about what I wanted to do, so I decided to take her up on the offer. The next morning, while my boyfriend was at work, I packed up all of my essential belongings and left. I didn't take any of the furniture or household items we had bought together because I just wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. I left him a note explaining that I was leaving and that I would be in touch about getting the rest of my things and handling the lease situation. I've been staying with my sister for about 2 weeks now, and it's been both devastating and liberating at the same time. Devastating because I'm grieving the loss of a relationship that I thought was going to be my future, but liberating because I'm no longer walking on eggshells or sleeping on a couch in my own home. Final update. It's been 3 months since I left, and I wanted to give everyone a final update on how everything turned out because the support from this community has meant everything to me during this nightmare. First, the legal situation. I did decide to join the other women in filing charges against the men from that forum. It turned out that there were 7 of us total whose privacy had been violated in various ways. The case is still ongoing, but our lawyer seems optimistic that we have a strong case for invasion of privacy and harassment. My ex-boyfriend has been trying to contact me through mutual friends to ask me to drop the charges, but I've made it clear that's not going to happen. The most shocking development came about a month after I left when one of our mutual friends reached out to me with some information that completely changed my understanding of the situation. Remember how I mentioned that my ex's behavior toward me had been gradually changing over several months? Well, it turns out there was a reason for that had nothing to do with the forum. Our friend told me that my ex had actually been cheating on me for almost 6 months before I left. He had been having an affair with a woman from his workplace, and the forum posts and the period-shaming behavior had apparently been his way of trying to create distance between us so that he could end our relationship without having to admit to the cheating. This revelation was initially devastating, but then it became oddly comforting. It meant that his disgusting behavior wasn't really about periods or female biology at all. It was about him being a coward who couldn't just be honest about wanting to end our relationship. Instead of having an adult conversation about his feelings, he had decided to make my life miserable until I either left on my own or gave him a reason to break up with me. The woman he was cheating with apparently had no idea that he was living with someone. When she found out about me and about the forum situation, she broke things off with him immediately. According to our mutual friend, she was horrified to learn about his online activities and wanted nothing to do with someone who would treat women that way. So not only did his plan to push me away backfire completely, but he also lost the woman he was cheating with and is now facing potential legal consequences for his actions. I can't say I feel sorry for him. As for me, I've been doing better than I ever expected. Living with my sister has reminded me how much I enjoy having close relationships with other women and how much I had isolated myself during my relationship without realizing it. My sister and I have always been close, but spending this time together has strengthened our bond in ways I didn't expect. I've also been going to a support group for women who have experienced emotional abuse in relationships. I was hesitant to call what I went through abuse at first because there was no physical violence, but the other women in the group helped me understand that what my ex did was absolutely a form of psychological and emotional abuse. Making me sleep on the couch, sharing intimate details about my body with strangers, and gradually wearing down my self-esteem were all tactics designed to control and demean me. The support group has been incredibly healing. Hearing other women's stories has helped me realize that I wasn't crazy for feeling hurt and violated by my ex's behavior. It's also helped me identify patterns in our relationship that I had normalized but that were actually red flags for controlling and manipulative behavior. I've started dating again, very casually, and it's been interesting to see how differently men can react to basic aspects of being a woman. I went on a few dates with a guy who, when I mentioned I wasn't feeling well because of cramps, immediately offered to bring me soup and asked if there was anything else I needed. The contrast between his natural compassion and my ex's disgust was striking and helped me realize how abnormal my ex's behavior really was. I'm also in the process of buying my own place. I had been so focused on building a life with my ex that I had forgotten how much I enjoy having my own space. I found a cute one-bedroom apartment in my sister's neighborhood, and I'm excited about the prospect of creating a home that's entirely my own. The whole experience has changed my perspective on relationships in ways that I think will ultimately make me stronger and more selective about who I allow into my life. I used to think that love meant compromising and accepting someone's flaws, but now I understand that there's a difference between normal human imperfections and behavior that's fundamentally disrespectful or abusive. I've also become much more aware of subtle signs of misogyny in the men I meet. Things that I might have brushed off before, like jokes about women or dismissive comments about female experiences, are now immediate red flags for me. I realized that my ex probably displayed these warning signs early in our relationship, but I was too eager to see the best in him to pay attention. The legal case is moving forward, and regardless of the outcome, I'm proud that I stood up for myself and the other women who were violated by these men's actions. Our lawyer says that even if we don't win, the case is likely to set a precedent that will make it easier for other women to seek justice in similar situations. I've also been thinking a lot about how to prevent other women from going through what I went through. I've started volunteering with a local organization that provides education about healthy relationships to young adults. Sharing my story with college students and young women has been both difficult and rewarding, and I hope it helps some of them recognize unhealthy patterns before they become as entrenched as mine did. Looking back, I can see that there were so many signs that my ex didn't truly respect me as an equal partner. The period situation was just the most obvious and dramatic example, but it was part of a larger pattern of behavior that gradually eroded my sense of self-worth and normalcy. I'm grateful that his actions became so extreme that I was forced to confront the reality of who he really was, because I might have spent years more in that relationship otherwise. The hardest part of this whole experience has been accepting that someone I loved and trusted was capable of treating me so poorly. But I've learned that love isn't enough if it's not accompanied by basic respect and decency. I deserve to be with someone who sees all aspects of my humanity, including my biology, as natural and acceptable rather than shameful or disgusting. I'm not bitter about what happened, which surprises me. I'm mostly just grateful that I found out who my ex really was before we got married or had children together. I can't imagine how much more complicated and painful this situation would have been if we had been more legally or financially entangled. For anyone reading this who might be in a similar situation, I want you to know that you deserve better. If someone claims to love you but treats normal aspects of your body or your existence as shameful or disgusting, that's not love. That's control masquerading as love, and you don't have to accept it. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong or hurtful, it probably is, even if the other person tries to convince you that you're being too sensitive or unreasonable. You know your own experiences better than anyone else, and you have the right to expect basic respect and decency from the people who claim to care about you. I'm doing well now, better than I have in years actually. I have my own space, supportive relationships with family and friends, and a much clearer sense of what I will and won't accept in future relationships. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us end up being the catalyst for positive changes that we never would have made otherwise. That's my story. Thanks to everyone who offered support and advice throughout this journey. This community helped me feel less alone during one of the most difficult periods of my life, and I'll always be grateful for that.